I know many of us are sort of worn out from the summer garden right now, and fall is just sort of trotting in really slowly in some spaces. But now is the time to be getting our garlic, our shallots, and even onions into the garden in some places. If you can give me 1 good hour in the garden this month, you can absolutely set yourself up for really big flavor next summer, plus a few bonuses along the way. So today on Just Grow Something, we're going to walk through planting garlic and shallots and some tips on where it's okay to even plant onion sets for a summer harvest. We'll talk about when to plant for your location, how to prep the bed, and details about planting, which onions and shallots make sense to plant now, troubleshooting, and we'll answer your most frequently asked questions about these crops. Let's dig in.
Hey, I'm Karen, and what started as a small backyard garden 20 years ago turned into a lifelong passion for growing food. Now, as a market farmer and horticulturist, I want to help you do the same. On this podcast, I am your friend in the garden, teaching evidence-based techniques to help you grow your favorites and build confidence in your own garden space. So grab your garden journal and a cup of coffee and get ready to just grow something.
Quick reminder, if you are not on my email list, get on that list by going to justgrowsomethingpodcast.com/news. I send out an email each Friday on one specific topic, and I get the chance to get into some pretty good details about subjects that maybe don't warrant an entire episode to themselves, or sometimes additional details about a topic that we covered on the show, but then, maybe that part got cut in editing or something. It's also a really easy way for you to give me suggestions for topics or ask me questions directly by just replying to those emails. I read every reply that I get. So justgrowsomethingpodcast.com/news, and I will leave a link to that in the show notes. So if you are completely new to growing any of these crops, I'm going to leave links to full crop specific episodes for garlic and onions, plus the very detailed episode on planting onions in the fall in the show description. There's a lot of good information in those episodes, and they really are worth the listen. So this is honestly the time of year when I am just begging for the first frost to hit, and please just take out all of my plants because I'm tired, right? Our last frost date, our last normal frost date is usually like October 20th. And so, we're past that now, and we still haven't had our first frost. And looking at the 10-day forecast, it doesn't look like it's, anywhere near frosting anytime soon. And so I am still picking tomatoes and peppers and cutting celery and cucumbers, and I'm kind of over it. And so when we're tired like this, it might seem like, getting out there and prepping a bed or two to be able to get these things like garlic and onions into the ground, it just sounds like a lot of effort, and maybe we're just not into it. But trust me when I say the effort is worth it. It is a really good, quick win in the spring without really having to do much at all, okay? If you can dedicate one area where you can go through and you can do some cleanup and you can do some bed prep and get these crops in, you will absolutely be thankful for it in the spring. And it doesn't necessarily have to be like one entire bed. If you are trying to do more in terms of intercropping next season, then garlic and onions and shallots are things that are really good for tucking in along the ends of beds that will be planted to other mixed crops in the spring. These can also be tucked into the corners of like your raised planters. And so you're still having places where you can plant all of your other crops because you will know where these are. These will already be popping up in the spring before you're ready to plant anything else. So it's not like you're going to forget where they are, okay? And again, you can just do full beds of these if you want to, or intermix them. There are loads and loads of options here for just getting these out into the garden. And that also includes doing some things in pots if you can put them in a protected area, or if you're not quite in such a cold zone, okay? So we're going to start with garlic because October is kind of prime time in a lot of the northern hemisphere for planting garlic. Now, some of these things, if you are in a colder zone, say maybe zone 4 or colder right now, you might have missed the window. Don't panic because you might still be able to do something with these so long as your ground is not frozen by now. You very well may be beyond your first frost, and that's okay. We just don't want the ground solidly frozen yet, okay? We want to get them in at the right time so that they get a chance to go ahead and root. But not all is not lost if you think you've missed the window, okay? Garlic should go into the ground in the fall because it needs vernalization. This is like a cold period. Otherwise, those bulbs are not going to differentiate. You're not going to get those multiple cloves in the bulb. So it roughly needs like a month or two at temperatures between 32 and 50 degrees Fahrenheit in order to be able to properly differentiate like that. So this chilling naturally happens if we plant it in the fall. If you really are in an area where it has just gotten too late to do this, you can do a spring planting, but you're going to have to artificially chill those cloves first. So you will need to put them like in your refrigerator for a good 6 to 8 weeks prior to planting them out in the spring. They're still going to be smaller, more than likely, but at least you'll get those differentiated bulbs instead of just like one giant clove, which if you've ever planted garlic in the spring and it didn't get that vernalization period, you know exactly what I'm talking about. You get like one giant clove of garlic and that's it. You don't get the individuals, okay? In terms of what type you should be planting, hardneck garlic is really generally better for the colder climates. And the bonus to this is that you get that edible scape in the late spring that you can cut off and you can use that before you even harvest the garlic. Softneck tends to be better in milder climates. Softneck also tends to store longer. So if you're in an area like I am, where we're zone 6B, we are practically like smack dab in the middle of the growing zones. I can actually plant both and do both very successfully. How they grow tends to be based on what our winter temperatures are like. So sometimes we have very, very mild winters and our soft neck does phenomenally well and the hard neck is just kind of so-so. And then there are other years where we have a really, really harsh winter and the hard neck does phenomenally well and the soft neck just kind of does so-so. Here in recent years, I think the soft neck has really sort of won out just because, number one, soft neck tends to be a larger head of garlic. So if you like a lot of cloves in your garlic, then soft neck is the way to go if you can get away with it in your climate. But we also do the hard neck too because it generally has a stronger flavor. So soft neck is going to store longer and it's also what you use to make braids in most instances. If you want to do a garlic braid, the soft neck is easier to work with. And the hard neck, although it tends to be smaller, does tend to have a stronger flavor. So we just like to do both. Now, do you need to order certified disease-free garlic? Yes and no, okay? That is the recommendation. And if it's your first time ever growing garlic, then I would recommend yes. If you can do that, then by all means do it. It's going to give you a better level of initial success. You're not going to worry about bringing a disease into your garden that you don't already have. And you know that it has been cured properly in order to be able to, sprout properly. You know, it hasn't been sprayed with anything that would prevent it from sprouting. This is the only problem, well, not the only problem, one of the problems with buying garlic in the grocery store and trying to grow it. Oftentimes it is sprayed with a hormone to keep it from sprouting. And that obviously defeats the purpose if we want them to sprout, okay? You can do better if you're buying like certified organic bulbs in the grocery store. But if the price of like seed garlic sends you reeling because it is fairly expensive, I think this year the sources that I have seen, they've gone up to close to, $28 for a pound of seed garlic, which is really, really high. And I get it. They're certified that they don't have a disease. And so, it's a good way to start. But if you have a farmer close to you that you trust. If there is somebody at the farmer's market that you shop with or you have a CSA through who grows things in organic matter, and they can tell you, no, we've had no diseases, yes, this is okay for you to plant, you likely can find seed garlic a lot less expensively if you just get them straight from your local farmer. But if you really want to make sure that you're getting off to your best start, then yes, certified disease-free actual seed garlic is a really good idea. The classic rule of thumb basically for garlic is you want to plant it about 3 to 6 weeks before the ground freezes. Now, it's like, oh, when is that going to be? Because you never really know, right? So just aim for when your soil temperatures are around 50 degrees Fahrenheit and they're starting to drop. So in my colder regions, yeah, late September, maybe early October. If you haven't gotten your garlic in, you really probably want to do that. Once we get further south or we get into those warmer regions, we're talking October into November. I have planted our garlic and our onions as late as the 3rd week in November and had no problem with them, getting rooted in. The key here is that you really just want enough time for the roots to get established, but you don't want to plant so early that you're getting a ton of leafy top growth and then you have a hard freeze that kind of kills it off. The hard freezes obviously aren't going to damage these bulbs, but you don't want all that green at the top because that can actually, improve your chances or increase your chances of there being some damage to the bulb underneath. The one thing to remember mostly about where you plant your garlic is that garlic does not like having its feet wet. Okay, it doesn't want to be wet all the time. So we want a sunny bed because you are going to want the full sun. You want to make sure that it is well drained. This is why raised beds are really, really great for this because you tend to have better drainage. If you can work in some finished compost for organic matter and even some fertility, that is really going to do well for garlic. It really likes that organic matter. This is especially important if you have very heavy soil. You want to probably prioritize drainage over fertility if you have to choose between them if you have really heavy soil because the bulbs just are not going to get to the mature size or the right size if they're in really heavy sort of mucky wet soil. Okay, you do want to make sure though that you are sort of rotating these crops away from other allium crops. So if you have a bed where you grew onions this year, you likely do not want to rotate in any garlic. Now, the one caveat to this is if you do a lot of heavy interplanting and intercropping like I do, then you're less likely to need to worry about rotating these crops because we're mixing all of those crops in and against each other, especially when they're in different, plant families, then we're minimizing that disease risk. But if you have seen anything like any type of a white rot or basal rot or anything in any of your alliums before, then make sure that you're rotating those beds and absolutely start with clean seed stock. That's going to be your number one disease prevention step. So any allium diseases whatsoever, then yes, go for that certified seed garlic, okay? When you go to plant garlic, you're going to break those bulbs into their individual cloves right before planting. This is not something that you want to do ahead of time. And you want to try to keep as much of that papery wrapper intact on each one of those cloves. And sometimes it's just going to come off. That's just how it goes. Especially if you have saved your own garlic to replant. That's another thing too. If you have grown garlic this year and you want to go ahead and use your own, then that's fine. Just make sure that you are choosing the largest, healthiest cloves that you have, and then save the smaller ones for use in your kitchen. Okay, so just like when we're saving seeds and we see the specimen that is the biggest and the best and the most beautiful, and that is the one that we save our seeds from because that's the genetics that we're trying to reproduce. Same thing goes with the garlic. If you're planting from very small bulbs or small cloves, then you're likely going to get small garlic. So pick the biggest and the best to go ahead and plant those. Make sure that you plant with the pointy end up. You want that basal plate where the root system is to be facing down. And then you're going to cover each one of those cloves with about 1 to 2 inches of soil, which is going to put it roughly about 2 to 3 inches deep, depending on how you have prepped your bed. If you do it all in a furrow and you drop them down and then you cover up, then yeah, it's going to be about 2 to 3 inches. If you just poke holes, which is what I tend to do, and drop them in, then you're looking at about 2 inches or so down and then just patting it covered up. If you are in a very cold zone, or you have soil that is really prone to frost heave, meaning as that freeze thaw cycle continues through the winter, it tends to push things up out of the ground, you might need to plant a little bit more deep. So 3 to 4 inches might actually be how you want to plant your garlic, okay? If you're in a milder zone, then yeah, shallower is fine. 1 to 2 inches is going to be okay. You just want to space them about 4 to 6 inches apart in rows that are about 8 to 12 inches apart, or you can do it in a grid like the square foot gardening method or whatever, and just do them in blocks that way. And that's what I tend to do. I just space them, 4 or 6. Usually it's about 6 inches across because I have a dibbler that my husband built for me where each little, spacer, I guess, is 6 inches from each other. And the whole thing is 4 feet wide, if I remember correctly. So I just go 6 inches by 6 inches all the way down. That's how I do. I do my onions the same way. Okay, so it's just because I'm planting so many, it makes sense for me just to use the same dibbler and just to do the same thing over and over again. In terms of water, you just want to water once, basically, after you're planting it, just to settle the soil. And then, if you're in a very dry zone through the winter times, then you might need to water occasionally. Since it's not actively growing, again, we don't want that to be super saturated all the time. We don't want their feet wet, but you don't want it to be bone dry either. So if either your soil conditions are really dry unusually for you for the winter, then you might want to once a month give it some water. Otherwise, generally speaking, you can just let the rainfall or the snowfall take care of it for you in the winter time. The one thing that you also do, though, is you want to mulch, okay? This is your insurance policy, especially if you are in a cold area. If you are in a very warm area, you may not necessarily need to mulch, but you know me and my feelings on mulch. This is going to protect your soil no matter what. So 3 or 4 inches of clean straw or shredded leaves over the bed immediately after planting is really going to help buffer those winter temperature swings. So it's going to prevent that sort of freeze thaw heaving. It is also going to help to keep those spring weeds at bay because we don't want that competition with our garlic when they're just starting to sprout in the springtime, okay? If you are in a very, very cold area, then you likely want to add as much as 6 inches of straw to help with keeping it insulated, but you are going to have to pull it back in the spring to help warm that soil up and just leave a thin layer to suppress those weeds, okay? You might see a little bit of growth on these depending on when you plant them, and a little bit of growth is fine. We don't want there to be like 4 inches or 6 inches of growth before we start to see our really hard freezes. So if that does happen, that's an indication for you the next time that maybe you want to wait and plant a little bit later. Once we get to the spring and you start seeing those shoots coming up and they're about 6 to 8 inches tall, that is when we start a top dress or side dress with some sort of a nitrogen source, and then keep that moisture sort of steady as the bulbs start to grow. And then we want to back off the water as we approach the harvest. So if you go back and listen to that garlic episode, it's going to have a lot more information about, what to do in the spring and how to harvest and those types of things. We're just worried right now about getting them in the ground and getting them off to a really good start. Now, let's talk onions and shallots. And if you're wondering what the difference is between onions and shallots, because I never really had an idea before, basically onions grow individually, whereas shallots grow in clusters, similar to garlic. Like, you see the individual cloves of garlic. That's sort of how shallots grow. They kind of grow in these clumps. Shallots generally have a milder, a little bit more delicate flavor compared to onions, which tend to be a little bit sharper. And then, of course, because they're growing in this little cluster, shallots have more of a teardrop shape, and they have a light purplish flesh, where, onions are typically round or maybe kind of, squat. And they can obviously vary in color. You got purple, red to yellow to white, all of these things, okay? Most people will go ahead and plant shallots in the fall. The sets can be planted basically after your first frost so that you get a late spring to early summer harvest in a lot of climates. These are ones where you want to space them about 3 to 6 inches apart in rows that are 12 to 18 inches apart. This is very, very similar to how we plant our garlic. So again, I'm just going to do 6 by 6 for my entire grid. But if you're planting these in little pockets of your raised beds or in beds that are going to be mixed then later on down the road, then just do them, 3 to 6 inches apart in whatever way that you can. The beautiful thing about all of these things, the alliums, they don't need any pollination. They're not, necessarily needing to be up against others of their kind in order to be able to grow. So you can pop them in wherever you want, just so long as they're not too close together. You're not worried about them being too far apart, okay? Now, if you do have really, really severe winters, then shallots can be a little bit sensitive to this. So if you are like zone 4 or colder, then you might consider extra mulch or just waiting until the spring, because you absolutely can do this in the spring too. I just like to get a jump on things. It's one less thing that I have to worry about in the spring. And that is why I also do my onions. So for bulbing onions, the large bulbing onions, most resources are going to recommend doing them in the spring. But fall planting does have a niche, okay? You can absolutely do some bunching onions, right? There are like perennial and multiplier types. So the Egyptian walking onion is one of them. But I do full-blown onion sets in the fall. And I basically treat them the exact same way I do shallots or I do garlic. And in some areas, this is going to work for you. In other areas, it's just going to give you like early green onions, or if they go a little bit further, then you might get what we refer to as spring onions, which means they're not really getting to that full-size maturity that you normally would harvest for a big summer bulb. But these are still very good. Like, you still get like the green top that you can use for green onions, and you get an immature onion that's maybe just not huge, but it's fresh and you can use it right away. So we do both, right? I will plant onion sets right now in the fall in the exact same manner that I do the shallots and I do the garlic. So I'm trying to get them in, 4 to 6 weeks before the first really kind of hard freeze. Usually this is around now. In, warmer areas, it might be later. Again, the same thing with the onions and the shallots is you want the sets to establish some roots, but you don't want them to start to develop like any top growth before the winter. I have planted, again, these sets as late as mid-November in our warmer years, like what we're having now, and had no problem. It's really more about the soil temperature at this stage of the game and less about the air temperatures and the daylight hours. We just want them to get some root growth on them before they go completely dormant. And in my experience, you may see some top growth depending on the air temperatures through the winter, okay? I actually have a YouTube video titled Fall Planting Onions, I think. And I will link to that one in the show notes also. And you can see in that video, I show the onions in January, and you can see they have, long green tops on them, but they haven't been damaged. They're okay. So essentially, you want to do the same thing with your onions, your bulb onions, as you do with your garlic. you do want to mulch. And again, the mulch is going to be heavier the colder your area is. And in some instances, when they come up in the spring, they may end up bolting depending on what area of the country you're in or what zone you are in, and that is okay. They are still usable, but this is why I do both. So I will plant the sets in the fall, and then I will plant from seedlings in the spring. So I will start seedlings indoors and I will transplant those out. And that way I'm sort of, once again, covering all my bases to make sure that I get what I need in terms of my onions. Okay, so what about some troubleshooting? There are 3 easy ways that you can kind of, cause problems with any of these crops. And the first one is planting too early, because you're going to get a lot of top growth that winter kills, and the possibility of you damaging that bulb underneath is much higher. The other way is to plant too late, and you're going to get poor rooting, which means that they may not survive the winter because they have no way to take up any water or anything during the winter time. They're just going to kind of sit there and rot. The other thing is you could get that frost heaving. If it doesn't get a chance to root in at all, as your soil goes through that freeze-thaw cycle, they're more likely to pop up out of the ground and be damaged. And then the third way is that soggy soil. None of these crops like having their feet wet. So, make sure that it's well-draining soil. Try to plant when, you're not getting a solid rain going on. In some areas, I know winter tends to be your rainy season. So if you can get them in the ground before that starts happening, that's your best idea. Just use your timing cues in terms of, the temperatures and when you think your frost or your ground is going to start to freeze, and use that as your guide as to when to get these in. Again, mulch and winter care for your onions is essentially the same as your garlic. So when you're overwintering onions, you want to mulch to help insulate these bulbs. It's also going to retain the moisture. It's going to suppress the weeds. The best mulch options kind of depend on your climate and what materials you have available to you. I always use straw. We've also done shredded leaves. If you live somewhere where pine trees are prevalent, pine needles are fine. If you're in really cold zones, I definitely suggest the straw and the shredded leaves. They tend to have the best insulation. If you're in a warmer zone, you may not need much mulch at all for any kind of cold protection, mainly just for weed protection, okay? So again, 3 to 4 inches, just like with our garlic, if you are in a colder climate, even more if you need to, and you're going to have to pull that back. And then, if you're in a zone like 7 through 9, 2 inches is probably plenty. If you are in zones 3 through 6, your onion sets are going to remain dormant during the winter, and they're going to start resuming growth very slowly in the early spring as the soil starts to warm, and then they're suddenly going to take off. So if you can keep the soil lightly moist through the spring, especially as the weather warms, then you're going to be better off. If you're in zone 7 through 11, your seedlings, your onion seedlings, are going to continue to grow over the winter, and it's going to put on more growth as the spring approaches. So again, water regularly, but we don't want to oversaturate the soil. And then as far as feeding them, once that spring growth resumes, then you're going to want to side dress, just like with the garlic, with a nitrogen-rich fertilizer of some sort, blood meal, composted manure, feather meal, and that's going to promote that leafy growth. You do want to stop feeding that nitrogen once those bulbs start to swell. If you see bulbs starting to heave up after it starts to thaw in a little bit in the winter, toss some extra mulch on the bed. In the spring, then you can decide if you want to pull that mulch aside to warm up the soil, or if you just want to leave a thinner layer to keep the weeds down. But that's the perfect way to approach it. Okay, so can you plant grocery store garlic? Yes, but avoid it if it's not organic, for sure, because it likely has been treated to prevent that sprouting. It can possibly carry diseases. So if you are new to this game, please use certified seed or garlic bulbs from a trusted grower. If you've missed this fall window, then plant in the early spring, right? Consider pre-chilling those cloves. So about 6 to 8 weeks in the refrigerator. To at least get that differentiation of the bulbs. You still might expect some smaller bulbs. Mulch, please. 3 to 4 inches of straw or treaded leaves. If you are in a really cold region, then make sure that you are mulching heavier. And at this point, once you get a good crop of garlic, then you can hold those, like your biggest and best, healthiest bulbs from the harvest to go ahead and plant again the next year if you haven't seen any diseases. Now, can you grow your own sets, onion sets? The answer is yes. Those onion sets are simply onion seeds that were grown right into a little seedling, and they were allowed to start to form that little bulb, and then they were bent over and basically pinched off to prevent them from continuing to grow. This is sort of forcing them into a dormancy and making them essentially going to be a second year onion when you plant them. So if you want to try doing your own, you can save some of your spring seedlings if you grow them from seed, plant half of them, allow the others to continue to grow a little bit, or you can plant them really, really close together out in the garden if you want. And then once they get to, a nice little, I don't know what size you would call that. I mean, like a pearl onion, right? Once they get to that size, pinch them over and get them to stop growing. Pull them and let them dry. And then you have your own sets to plant in the fall. I know it can be difficult to find sets to plant. I will leave a link in the show notes to where we always get ours, and I've had great luck with it. I just encourage you, garlic and onions both. It is sort of low effort because you get to throw it in the ground and then just give it minimal attention over the winter time, and it's going to start bouncing back up for you in the spring. It's like a no-brainer. Just make sure you're picking a sunny, well-drained bed and you're using, clean seed. You're planting them at the appropriate depth and the appropriate width away from each other, and you're basically done until spring, okay? Just make sure that you're giving everybody a little mulch blanket too. So don't forget, justgrowsomethingpodcast.com/news to get on my email list. You never know what topic I'm going to show up on Fridays in your inbox with. And all of the links to all the different episodes that I referenced today are all going to be in the show notes for you as well. Until next time, my gardening friends, keep on cultivating that dream garden, and we'll talk again soon.